Hello, my name is Ed Betoff, Senior Fellow at the Conference Board. It's a pleasure to welcome you to this edition of Off the Shelf, a book discussion series brought to you by the Conference Board. Today, I will be sitting down with Amy Jen Su to discuss her latest book entitled The Leader You Want to Be: 5 Essential Principles for Bringing Out Your Best Self Every Day. For almost 2 decades, Amy Jen Su has worked with CEOs, executives, and rising stars to help them be their best self as they lead organizational change and transformation. Amy is a highly experienced executive coach and consultant. Amy is also the co-author of the best-selling book, Own the Room: Discover Your Signature Voice to Master Leadership Presence. Welcome, Amy.
Thank you, Ed, for having me. I'm so delighted to be here.
And we're happy to have you. Amy, please tell us a bit about your newest book, which I understand is hot off the press this month, so a big congratulations for you.
Thank you, Ed. Yeah, I'm really excited for the book to be out in the world, reaching folks this month. And the big idea in the book is, how can we all, in this very time-starved world where the external game and circumstance is always changing and moving and tugging at us, what are the practical ideas and strategies and ways and all the things I've observed in these last 20 years as an executive coach? How do we stay in that driver's seat, and how do we bring out our best self every day?
Very interesting. I've had an opportunity to read the book, and I highly recommend it to others. Amy, let's move to some questions, and we're all interested in your responses, and this will further introduce the book to everyone. We all want to bring out our best selves to work every day, but what makes that especially challenging? What do you find gets in the way?
Ed, I find that there are 3 really big challenges that I hear out in the market every day when I'm talking to folks out in the trenches. And the first is time. There are just never enough hours in the day. How often this week or last week did you find yourself saying that? And what's so interesting is I was just recently reading in Gallup that 41% of us feel like we do not have enough hours in the day to get done what we need to get done. And the research shows that this is especially true for those who are employed and who have children under 18. And the second big challenge, I think, is other people. There are just so many different types of people we need to work with and to align with and to influence on our jobs. And so in many ways, people can get in our way as well. And then the third challenge that I hear most often is that we get in our own way. We can be our own hardest critics, and I find that really high-performing people who want to make a difference in the world can often be hardest on themselves.
Yeah, these are kind of the big 3 obstacles.
Right.
Huh?
They do get in the way. Time, people, and ourselves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You want to tell us just a little bit about the time element of that? What are some things that you recommend in terms of managing your time more effectively? And I think you go well beyond traditional time management techniques.
Absolutely. I think given that we do all feel like we live in this time-starved world, having ways to focus our time and energy becomes super critical. So 2 of the principles in the book really hone in on this idea of time, focus, and energy. And so the first is, how do we really focus on our purpose and we reset that compass and pause in the day and lift out of the daily grind to say, hey, what's the difference I want to make here, and what's my highest and best contribution? And at the same time, to stay connected to our passion. What are you inspired by and what are you jazzed by? And to really try to prioritize those things that fall at that sweet spot of contribution and passion.
You know, I can remember the times when, in many occasions, both in my own career and in trying to help others in their careers, when people who are working, they're working full out, they don't have time for anything else. But then when they are presented with an opportunity to do something that they love doing, that they're passionate about, somehow they manage to fit that in. Has that been your experience?
Absolutely. I think passion and connecting to what we're interested in now is so critical. What jazzed you 10 years ago versus 5 years ago, maybe even a year ago, is different. And I think we lose track of that when life is busy. And so when we stay connected to that, folks will say when they're working on something that they're excited about and they feel like make a difference, suddenly they say, they didn't even notice time and they got into a flow and the hours just slipped by.
Very, very good. Thank you. Your book is called The Leader You Want to Be, and in the book you talk a lot about Leader A and Leader B. Tell us more about what Leader A and Leader B is. What are you thinking there?
Leader A and Leader B was really a rubric I created, a way to have a language to try to describe to others what I myself was feeling inside and what I sensed other people were feeling, which was this internal teeter-totter of sometimes I'm my best self and sometimes, honestly, Ed, I'm not my best self. And so Leader A was a way of describing what is like a first mode we all have, where we are our best self. We don't resist the moment, even if it's challenging. We're a little more open. We hold a broader mindset. We're just flowing with a little more ease and effectiveness and resilience. And Leader B, which I think my husband or son would tell you that after a very long day, they see a lot of Leader B, is when we're resisting that moment and we aren't with the flow and we're like fighting that current and maybe taking things a little more personally than we intended to.
That really hits, that very simple model really hits home for me. I can recall during my corporate days, which was the vast majority of my career, coming home and really, really being tired from a very strenuous day. And what I found was the first 10 or 15 minutes home, I wasn't nearly as good as I wanted to be.
Yes.
So we came to an agreement with my wife and with our 2 children that just give daddy 10 or 15 minutes when he gets home, and he'll be the daddy that we all know.
That is a great practice, though, to recognize and have the awareness that transition from work to home is so critical.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you. In the book, you discuss 5 essential principles, which you call 5 Ps. They are purpose, process, people, presence, and peace. Please talk to us a little bit about each one of those Ps.
The 5 Ps really emerged out of looking across the thousands of leaders that our firm has worked with and saying, what's been the commonality? What are the things that help people stay in the driver's seat? And we found they fell in these 5 buckets. And so the first, on purpose, which we already discussed, where the action being to reset your compass and again staying connected to your contribution and to your passion. And then the second P is process, where the guidance is to reboot your personal operating system. We all have rituals and processes and structures that we know help to support our best self, and often we lose track of them. So it's important to reboot that personal operating system. And then the third P is people, which is about raising our game by raising the game of others. So as we level up, we have to level up our teams and our network of support around us. And then the fourth P begins to shift to our internal world as professionals, where the guidance is to not scratch that itch, and our ability to stay present and to self-regulate, even in the face of discomfort or challenge, becomes really critical to our effectiveness. And then the last P is peace. And I love the word peace, when we just settle into ourselves and we realize we have nothing to prove and we can really be in service of something bigger than ourselves.
That's a very, very helpful framework for that serves as part of the basis of your book. Now, Amy, you serve as an executive coach for very senior executives and leaders. In your own experience, working with a wide range of executives, have you seen that they have difficulty with one or two of these more than others, or is it across the range of the 5 Ps?
That's such a great question. And as I reflect on that, I would say it's a range across the 5 Ps. At any given moment, I might have a set of executives where, let's say they've just onboarded into a much larger role, or the organization has just gone through an acquisition and there's wild change in the organization. We're just fundamentally getting effective again in terms of your purpose, your process, and your people become really critical. There's also a set of folks I'm working with who are very successful, feel like they're extremely effective on the job. They would say if you went to interview their teams, they seem like they are riding along perfectly well, but on the inside, they'll say to you that they aren't sure if they're really enjoying the ride as well as they could. So
they're really churning.
They're churning, and there's a striving, and there's an inability to really feel present and taste the joy of work. And so it's interesting, the first 3 Ps really tie to our external world of effectiveness, and the final 2 Ps were intended to really address the inner world of a professional.
Thank you. At the beginning of your book, you focus on what you call the 4 pitfalls of doing. You have some wonderful frameworks, by the way, in this book. Can you tell us what they are and some suggestions of how to deal with them, what to do with them?
The 4 pitfalls, I put right there up front in the book because I realized in working with folks, and even in my own experience, that we all have coping mechanisms. So when the time frame feels tight, or we're under stress, or perhaps we're feeling a little out of control, it's easy to grab for one of these coping mechanisms, which feel really great in the short term. But over the long term, if they become your operating norm, then you can really get into some trouble. So the 4 pitfalls are, the first is, just do more. And the faulty assumption here is that if I just do more and I take on more, somehow I'll add value and I'll be okay. And that's the faulty mindset in that pitfall. And the second is just do it now. The faulty assumption being that if I let adrenaline run the show and I treat everything as an emergency and I do everything I possibly can do right now, that somehow my to-do list will go away. And we all know that just isn't true. The third pitfall is just do it myself. And the faulty assumption here is that in the face of uncertainty or my need for control, that I think I can do something better or faster instead of delegating it to my team. And then the fourth pitfall is, I'll just do it later. How often have we all said, I'll eventually get to the gym, Ed. I'll eventually take care of myself. I'll eventually take that vacation. And so those are the 4 pitfalls. And really the way to work with them is by bringing a little more self-awareness and compassion, and really this leader A mindset. Instead, I hope folks say to themselves, let me do more when it's my value add and my passion. Let me just do it now when I've decided this really does have a sense of urgency and not everything is an emergency. Or I'll just do it myself when in fact it's my highest and best use for the team. And finally, I hope people say, I'll just do that thing later. I'm going to back burner something else so that I open some time and space for my own self-care.
Amy, you are giving us a lot to think about, both on the proactive side and some principles that can guide our thinking, as well as some things to stay away from as well, and some ideas on how to deal with those. Thank you for that. We're going to take a short break for some quick announcements and be back in just a minute to continue this fascinating conversation with Amy Jen Sue on the book, The Leader You Want to Be, 5 Essential Principles for Bringing Out Your Best Self Every Day.
Can you, your team, or your company benefit from insights such as the ones provided in this podcast? They are immediately available when you join the Conference Board, a membership-based think tank that delivers trusted insights for what's ahead. Reaching across industries and geographies, we bring together our noted experts, senior executives from the world's largest companies, and nonpartisan practical research to help you address your most important business issues. Our membership packages are tailored to your organization's unique needs and budget. To learn more about our offerings, go to www.conferenceboard.org and click Join on the top bar to connect with one of our product specialists.
Welcome back to Off the Shelf with Amy Jen Sue. Let's continue our discussion, Amy, of your most recent book, the leader you want to be, 5 essential principles for bringing out the best self every day. So, Amy, of the 5 P's, you consider purpose to be the most essential. Tell us more about that and why the most essential.
When I looked at the 5 P's, I really thought about purpose sitting right there at the top. Because when we're clear on why are we uniquely here and what was I made for and what's the difference I'm trying to make now, that begins to clarify so many other things. I think in a world where requests are always coming in at us, it can feel like arrows being shot at us all the time. Being clear on our purpose begins to give clarity to our yeses and our nos. And that's really important. And I think what sits underneath of having a clear yes is actually the courage to prioritize what you think matters most. And that's really hard when there's always urgent things right there. I think purpose further drives our processes. It further drives the people that we'll need to surround ourselves with. And again, it really elicits a different courage within. And so for me, purpose is the most important and sits at the top.
Amy, with purpose, have you seen any relationship between the clarity with which one is in their own thinking, their purpose, their personal vision of who they are, and their energy level, what they actually bring to the table every day? Have you seen anything related to that?
I don't have empirical research that's coming to mind, but I will say anecdotally, I feel like as I think about the many professionals I've had good fortune to work with, when somebody comes in to debrief you on their week and they're telling you about their best moments or what they're most proud of or what they're excited about in the work, it seems to me that there is a correlation of some kind to this feeling of purpose and being on purpose and living one's purpose. So I do feel like there is some interconnection there that we all have to pay attention to.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. You also talk about the power of people. Now, you've mentioned this in your earlier comments. How are people an essential part of bringing out our best selves and doing that on a daily basis?
People are such a big part of our lives, and it's amazing how oftentimes we can have a really bad day when we're in conflict with others or feel drained by others, or we could have some of our best professional experiences when we're operating with a high-functioning team. And I think for many professionals, they find that the reality of it is we're all capped by our own capacity. So it does not matter, Ed, how much of a rock star you are yourself. At some point, you will hit your own cap of effectiveness and need to bring other people into the foray to achieve really big goals. So I think people are really essential that way. And I think this means that we have to learn to trust more, and we have to learn to be more vulnerable and to ask for help. And asking for help sometimes doesn't feel that comfortable for many of us who are self-reliant or who, want to do things ourselves or don't want to feel like we're putting out somebody else. So getting comfortable at asking for help is really important too.
So you've given us a few tips on that. Any other suggestions you have for our listeners about bringing out the best in others, either for people who have been individual contributors and now they are leading a team, or for those who have been doing this for some time but still have to bring out the best in their professionals and their leaders? Any other ideas that you have that you could share with us? Sure.
I think as whether you're a new people leader or you've been at it for a long time, really just realizing that each person has such a unique contribution and talent to bring, and to really spend the time to understand that. So in the course of everyday conversations with your team, are you spending the time before a project to say, Ed, what do you want to learn as we take on this new project? What are you excited about? Or are you debriefing with your team after major milestones? I will often have folks say, wow, it was too bad we all worked so hard and our boss was on to the next deliverable, and we never just paused and took a victory lap or debriefed on what worked well or what we were all proud of. And those can make a big difference to how people feel engaged at work.
Yeah, so some of that appreciation of others, expressing that and having them express themselves, that kind of reinforcement and validation of their wins in that short term, or maybe even in the longer term, those are all very helpful.
Yes, I think that can go a long way. I had a leader once, we talked about that concept, and he decided to make that part of his monthly staff meeting, where he would start the meeting by having everyone go around the room and just say one thing they were proud of from that month. And the amount of sharing and celebration, and even just business information, they all learned so much about their areas that usually felt siloed. So that one question and setting the tone for the meeting differently made all the difference.
What a wonderful technique.
Yeah.
Great. As we advance in our careers, the focus is less on us and more about what we can do for others. How can we find the peace? That's the 5th P that you mentioned previously. Find the peace necessary to help us positively transform our teams and our organizations.
Peace, again, is such an internal dimension. It's not something others can see. But I do think peace within ourselves is such a necessary ingredient to being in service of a larger purpose. Think about when you were last not at peace. Folks will describe that they're agitated, they're stressed, they're worried. All of those things are natural to the human condition, but when it becomes our operating norm or becomes your center of gravity, it's something to really pay attention to. I've noticed for many of my clients that they reach a point in their career where the question they ask themselves shift. And before, it seems like they were asking themselves, how can I win? How can I do this better? What is life going to give me? And you see this magic moment when people begin to shift to asking, what is life asking of me now? What is my legacy going to be? How can I make a difference in somebody's life today? And I think that takes a certain amount of inner confidence and resilience to settle in enough to say, wow, I really want to make others better too.
Amy, when I think of peace, I think of it in a kind of a big picture, a macro sense, and that is kind of getting a handle on your entire life and your, as you said, your operating system. And I also think of peace in a smaller way, the kinds of things that and methods and practices and maybe habits that we have on a daily basis that we do that kind of center us in and bring us down in a positive way to a more centered position. So what are some of the techniques that you've seen or methods that you've seen or that you teach and coach others in that regard? Maybe what do you do yourself?
Right. No, that's, I love what you just shared there, Ed, this idea of we all need to have ways where we can find that center and that center of gravity within ourselves where we aren't being tugged by the world. And so for myself and some of the tips that I've offered to others, one of my favorites is really how you start your morning. So if you just even can block the first 15 minutes of the day to get yourself organized, to get centered, to take a look at your Outlook calendar and say, I might be in back-to-back meetings, but really there's just this one where a little bit of preparation would go a long way. Or to set your intention for the day for who is the leader I want to be today. That can go a long way to how the rest of your day flows. The other one I love is the 4-7-8 breathing technique, which is outlined in the book, which comes from the yogic tradition, where if you breathe in for a count of 4, hold your breath for 7, and then exhale for 8, you can do that as you're walking down the hall and can get quickly centered as you walk into maybe a high-stakes presentation or a meeting. And then there's been a lot written and research done on gratitude, and just even writing down 2 or 3 gratitudes a day that can really bring a sense of peace and realization that we all really have more than we need.
The things for which we are thankful?
Yes, the things for which we are thankful. Mm-hmm. So even at this moment, as listeners are listening to this, if you just even think about yesterday, what were 2 things you were really grateful for? That can bring a moment of peace pretty quickly.
Yeah. So now we're going to bring this home to you, Amy. How have you applied these lessons from your book in your own life? What are some of the things that you do?
It's so funny, when I finished the manuscript and went back and reread it, I realized in some ways the book is autobiographical. And I think it's as much my search for trying to figure out how to make a difference in the world but still hold it all together. And so the 5 essential principles really, truly, Ed, are how I try to reinvent myself, reset myself, come to center as needed. And it's interesting, as I reflect on when I first became a coach 20 years ago, at that time I was a solo practitioner and we didn't have kids, and I really just had to focus on client delivery. Fast forward 20 years later, I now have a 14-year-old son starting high school. We now have a team of 25 people at my firm, Paravis Partners, where my role is much bigger. I have to do business development. I have to do firm management. I wear many, many hats. And so as life has begun to ask more and more of me, the 5 Ps have been a really essential way to just make sure that I'm, not losing my mind and trying to stay centered.
I think that's why it's so easy for you to talk about these 5 Ps and some of the other principles in your book, because you are hard at work living these principles. And if you're like most of us, we're not perfect every day.
No, I do not have it figured out. And this is honestly a life in motion and trying to sort it out.
Yes. That sounds familiar to me as
Yes.
well. Yes. Are there people, or have there been people in your life who have modeled this, the principles in this book for you? So who have you learned from, and who are on what I like to call your personal board of advisors in that way, whether they're still with us or whether they were somebody in earlier in our lives who may not be with us today?
I think the first person that comes to mind is my mother, who is the embodiment of peace. I believe she walks through life with a leader A lens and truly appreciates life and is grateful. So first and foremost, she's been just a wonderful role model for me all these years. A couple of teachers also come to mind. One person, James Flaherty, who is the founder of New Ventures West Coaching School, where I got my coaching certification, and also Glenn Hartelius, who's the founder of Attention Dynamics. Both of these gentlemen have really influenced my thinking about coaching really is about our whole person and who's the next best version of you. And so I've learned a lot from both of these folks around the idea of having a center of gravity and coming back to our true core essence. I would say on the business side, Betty Hung, who is an operating principal for Vista Equity Partners, who's a dear friend and colleague, has been a really just wonderful thought partner around the practical realities of corporate life today. And so Betty actually is featured in the introduction of the book, and I quote her because in one of our conversations she and I had once, she said, gosh, when folks get promoted to bigger roles with new and greater responsibilities, they have to be able to reinvent themselves over and over again. And they have to be able to accelerate their velocity and their pace and their effectiveness. And how do you keep improving and growing at that rate? So in a lot of my banter and conversations with her, many of the ideas and tips and practical strategies, really I would, shout out to her as a key role model.
So it sounds like a lot of lessons learned from different people. Some were separate lessons, but then there was also some overlap between the lessons that you've learned from more than one person, maybe several people that have really resonated for you in your life.
Absolutely. I think this book is as much a synthesis and an integration of both holistic thinking that comes out of the coaching industry now and many traditions from the Eastern philosophy that I really love, as much as, hardcore practical realities of being in the business world and working with business professionals and trying to make sure that the tips and strategies in the book appropriately fit that context.
Amy, we could talk for another hour or two very easily on this book, but I think we need to bring our discussion to a close. So, Amy, thank you for this very informative interview, and thank you, audience, for your interest in listening to this and other podcasts from the Conference Board. Amy, please tell our audience where they can purchase and download your book.
For folks who might be interested in learning more, they can go to the website, theleaderyouwanttobe.com.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And if you enjoyed this episode with Amy, please remember to subscribe to our off-the-shelf discussion podcast programming from the Conference Board by visiting our website at www.conference-board.org/podcasts.